You're listening to an Airwave Media Podcast.
When you need to build up your team to handle the growing chaos at work, use Indeed Sponsored Jobs. It gives your job post the boost it needs to be seen and helps reach people with the right skills, certifications, and more. Spend less time searching and more time actually interviewing candidates who check all your boxes. Listeners of this show will get a $75 sponsored job credit at Indeed.com/podcast. That's Indeed.com/podcast. Terms and conditions apply. Need a hiring hero? This is a job for Indeed Sponsored Jobs.
Something was happening in San Francisco, and they needed to see it. And they were right. January 14th, 1967, it wasn't so much a rally. It was just a thing. A lot of people all doing different things at once. And people just kept arriving to the park, to the polo fields, till 10,000 were there and more. Some came for music. Some came for politics. Some came because they heard something was happening. None of the single things that were going on, speeches or Grateful Dead or Jefferson Airplane playing, were the particular draw. It was that everything was happening at once. The Grateful Dead was playing, and there was also a Buddhist teacher leading meditation chants. Timothy Leary makes his famous line, "Turn on, tune in, drop out." And Allen Ginsberg would be leading chants among the crowd. Dick Gregory would speak about civil rights. Gary Snyder would read poetry. Some crazy moments just converge like a skydiver drops into the crowd. LSD circulated openly, despite the fact that this was a banned substance at this time. Almost as a footnote, there's the role of a presidential grandson. This mixture of beat, poets, anti-war free speech movements, growing interest in non-Western philosophies were all part of this human be-in that occurred in 1967. The police didn't, break it up. They stood at the edges, largely powerless. One observer later described the feeling as a sudden realization of numbers, that the people who had felt marginal were not small at all. And that was exactly the point, if there was a point, to the human be-in. But there's something else. The date of the event had been chosen by a person we may describe as Chester Alan Arthur III, though he did not use that name, and he was not on stage. The grandson of a Gilded Age president had a great influence on American society, but not in Washington, D.C. We start with his father, who might be called Chester Alan Arthur II, who went by the name Alan Arthur, and Chester Arthur, the president, would have referred to him as Alan. He has his own dramatic moment. The son of Chester Arthur in September 1881, when James Garfield succumbs to gunshot wounds. And his father must step into the presidency. He's there as a teenager. He watched his father suddenly elevated to the highest office in America, and he saw his father shaken up. Born in 1864 in New York City, Alan Arthur grew up in a household that combined social ambition with emotional distance. His mother, Nellie, was warm, socially active, deeply concerned with her children. But his father was often elsewhere. We talked about this on the podcast. His job as the port collector of New York was the top government revenue job in the country. And it had political elements too. It wasn't just the job itself, but also the fact that because he was in this position, he was doing a lot of politics. A lot of it happens at night. He's consumed by politics. He's consumed by law. He's reached a level that he really has always wanted to get to. There are dinners that you have to go to at establishments like Delmonico's. The death of Alan's older brother before his own birth cast a long shadow over the family. And in response, Alan Arthur is indulged, protected, gently steered away from pressure. He's taught polish rather than rigor, charm rather than discipline. He was raised in a way that made his life resemble that of a European aristocrat. But before his father reaches the presidency, his mother suddenly dies of pneumonia. This loss shapes the household. Something softened in Chester Arthur after Nellie's death. Allen was a teenager, absorbed both the privilege and the absence that defined his upbringing. Then when his father became president, Allen entered Washington society not as a burdened heir, but as a participant. He thrives in it. He thrives in the social scene, the social aspects. He played the piano at the White House. He played banjo at White House gatherings. He took advantage of the presidential yacht. And he became known, not jokingly, as the Prince of Washington. Education did not anchor him. He attended Princeton University, commuting at all times to Washington to continue the social life he enjoyed. He enrolls at Columbia Law University with the expectation that he might eventually inherit his father's legal career. But he left law without completing the degree. He left law school. And then in 1886, a year after he leaves the presidency, Chester Allen Arthur dies. Allen was present there at the family home, and he burns a large portion of his father's presidential papers. He destroys documents that might have shaped how history remembered his father. There's something else. Chester Arthur, as we talked about in the 5-part series that we did, knew of his medical condition and knew that he didn't have, he had a kidney disease that there was no cure for. It didn't just get better. And that's why he refused all efforts to even put his name in nomination at the Republican 1884 convention. He might have accepted if the entire party said, President Arthur, we want you again. He wouldn't have refused it. But he didn't want to make any effort to have a presence at the convention, for him personally to get involved, for him to allow his top people to get involved in a campaign for him. And he held at least one government officer who wanted to help, held him back and said, I'll tell you after the convention. And when the guy asked after the convention, President Arthur said, I'm sick. I'm not going to have long to live, and I don't want to. And he would prove right. He only had a year left. And in that time, he tells his son, Allen Arthur, don't get involved in politics. But the Arthur family had a decent amount of money. And so in 1887, Allen Arthur inherits it and leaves for Europe, stays in Europe for more than a decade. He doesn't call himself Chester Arthur. He calls himself Allen Arthur. He counted figures like Albert Edward among his acquaintances. And that's the prince. That's the husband of Queen Victoria. He lived what contemporaries described as the life of a perfect Edward gentleman. He traveled widely. He enjoyed horses, fine dining. He cultivates relationships and amusements. And he doesn't have a profession. He had wealth enough to sustain his life without it. When he returns to the United States, it's around 1900. So this is pretty far from us, 15 years from his father's presidency. At this point, McKinley's president. It's not to re-enter New York or Washington society, but he relocates to where the family has a house in Colorado Springs. Allen also suffered from asthma and bronchitis, and the dry mountain air was widely believed to be therapeutic. But he also gets space, leisure, a frontier version of elite life. He could recreate a social world without the expectations that might have followed him in New York. There's no pressure. And he invests in the vast Trinchera estate. It is 250,000 acres. There's a cattle ranch, mining ground, timber, and there's a game preserve. So he has some income from this, but it also provides lifestyle benefits. And he lives there. He becomes deeply involved in club life. He's the president of the Cheyenne Mountain Country Club. He immerses himself in polo, his favorite sport. His home is called Edge Plain, and it becomes a gathering place for society figures. Roosevelt visits there and attends a polo match. So he's not like his father with an office or even a political club. It reaches a kind of peak with the creation of a clubhouse modeled after the Rabbit Club of Philadelphia. The Rabbit Club was something that Alan Arthur enjoyed. It was a social club with an emphasis on fine food, and everybody was positive and fun within its walls. Alan and his associate Spencer Penrose sought to recreate that in the West, in Colorado, and they built a clubhouse that emphasized culinary excellence, an elite social gathering. He marries Mira Townsend Fithian Andrews, who had been divorced, marries her in Switzerland in 1900. They have a son. This marriage is troubled, and he'll remarry again. And never does he really move beyond the role of host, sportsman, guy with a good joke, participant in elite circles. He'll die in 1937 in Colorado Springs. Guys, it's summer. Let's go shopping at Quince. Every summer, I like to do something a little different. I like to get a new polo shirt. I'm not getting a whole new wardrobe, but a new polo shirt. This year, it's the solid deep navy flow knit breeze performance polo. It's cool, it's comfortable, and it's from Quince. They also have Heather Ocean Navy, Olive, True Black, and then there's Heather Dewstone Blue. Lighter blue. Personally, I like that with like a brown slack or a dark gray slacks. Everything at Quince is priced 50 to 80% less than similar brands. They work directly with ethical factories and cut out the middlemen. So you're paying for exceptional quality. You're not paying for brand markup. I like my flow knit polo. I think you'll like what you purchase too. Make your summer wardrobe easier. Go to quince.com/myhist for free shipping on your order and 365-day returns. Now available in Canada too. That's QUINCE.com/myhist, MYHIST, for free shipping and 365 days returns. Quince.com/myhist. But there's no any kind of achievement or office or the kind of traditional things that we in history look at and say, okay, unlike Grant's son, who had a role as a police commissioner in New York City, not huge roles, but Garfield's son, who joined some cabinets, and Lincoln's son, who joined cabinets. That didn't happen with Arthur. But he did become a person that was known and influential in social circles. Now, he dies in 1937. 13 years later, picture San Francisco street. A man is selling newspapers. He's calling out headlines like anyone else, trying to make a few dollars. And nothing about him signals the pedigree, the kind of thing we just talked about with Alan Arthur. No one stopping to buy a paper is thinking about presidents, the Gilded Age, a White House of the 1880s. And even if they heard his name Arthur, it probably wouldn't land with much force. By mid-century, by 1950s, Chester A. Arthur was not exactly a household name. Well, even among people who don't listen to my podcast, it might not be. But the man selling papers was the president's grandson, Chester Alan Arthur III. After college, Gavin Arthur drifted into the world of radical politics and expatriate activism. He was involved with the Irish Republican movement at a time when Irish independence still stirred passions across the Atlantic world. Chester Arthur, too, had been a supporter of this movement, as had Chester Arthur's father. He lived for periods in New York and France. By the late 1920s, he became part of the avant-garde cultural scene, and he appears in the experimental film Borderline alongside Paul Robeson. So this is a film that has an African-American lead, and he's part of this. It's also a very experimental film involving social tensions, psychology. He drops the formal identity associated with the Arthur political family and creates that name Gavin in California. He settles among the sand dunes near Guadalupe and Nipomo on the California coast. He becomes one of the central personalities in a loose colony of artists, mystics, wanderers, and unconventional thinkers, later known as the Dunites. In these dunes, a few of us are gathered together from all walks of life, each independent in his own oasis, between unbelievably beautiful mountains of gold-white sand, yet all cooperating in a community life in which money means not much, and ideas mean a great deal. To be a Duneite, however, one does not necessarily have to live in the dunes. The dunes are symbolic of a state of mind, open, untrammeled by the cross-currents of metropolitan life. Some fortunate ones have the capacity of turning wherever they may be to a quiet oasis within themselves. These do not need actual dunes to turn to. But you can see how actual dunes might form an excellent place from which to publish a magazine with such point of view, free from the proselytizing instinct, free from static dogma, directed rather towards an agnostic and highly adventurous search. And he founds the magazine Dune Forum, which mixes literature, philosophy, spirituality. Here's what's said about him in the Dune Forum. Gavin Arthur will make a good editor primarily because he is so many-sided, and he has such wide views and sympathies. His life is colored, too, with memories of many people and many places. He has known labor leaders and royal dukes. He has looked from the viewpoint of both, yet kept his mind free. Always an agnostic, poet, rebel, sailor, gentleman, vagabond, born a Westerner, cosmopolitan, yet proudly a Californian, eager to test, to experiment. His whole life has been lived in the spirit which motivates this magazine. Such a product has been his life dream. This is from 1934 in the Dune Forum. The best lesson that poverty has taught us is the advantage of cooperation. We are all intensely individualistic, with ideas as different from one another as any in the country. Hence, we had to work out a way of life which, though we meet when the spirit moves us in a community house where there is a kitchen and a good cook and much conviviality, we still maintain our privacy in a separate oasis, or coves, as we call them. We have a net 90 feet long with which to comb the breakers for fish. The beach sands are full of succulent pismo clams, which we dig singly or in groups. Surplus fish and clams we trade with friendly market gardeners in the hinterland for vegetables, walnuts, fruit, and honey. One of us makes an excellent wine of grapes and honey, reminiscent of ancient mead. If any of us falls heir to a little money, or makes it by selling a poem or a willow wood carving, he buys a few luxuries for the common pot, or his own. And in the evening, around community or individual fires, such arguments are fought, such contrasting ideas are raised in such diverse manners, as would fill a dozen Dune forums daily. So you're getting the sense, I don't 100% know if that's Gavin's authorship, but he is the editor, and this is coming from the editorial pages. So you get a sense of what the Dune forum's doing. And what are we seeing here in this 1930s, right? You're seeing that connection. If one wonders, like, where did the 60s come from? And you could almost say, well, the beat poets, the 40s and the 50s, Jack Kerouac, Allen Ginsberg, right? But why would somebody like Jack Kerouac travel across the country to California, right? Which he did in 1949. And that was the subject of his book, On the Road. Why would someone like Allen Ginsberg leave New York and travel to, California? And this is what you see, that there was this community open, trying to do new things, ready to receive. And there you see the connection between, say, the early 1900s and the radical movements in the 60s. And his location in San Francisco is not an accident. He drifts there. He saw the life that his father led, the social life, and sort of wanted to create something similar, but with a twist, with more cultural influence. He lives in New York. He lives in Europe. He gets behind some political causes. But San Francisco is where he sees in the 40s and 50s. It's already a gathering point for people living outside conventional structures. Writers, mystics, political experimenters. People that don't want a stable career. And it's kind of an anonymous place, a big city one can get lost in, and that's exactly what he wants. He doesn't want to be anything in particular. He teaches classes at the prison in San Quentin. He writes. He explores astrology. And, when necessary, he sells newspapers to get by. The 1960s, something becomes visible to him. He's part of a network that includes people like the Beat Poets, Allen Ginsberg, Alan Watts, figuring into what will be called the counterculture. He really wants to think of human identity in a different way. And so when plans begin for a large gathering in Golden State Park meant to bring together music and communal expression, he plays a small but telling role. In fact, he selects the date using astrology. January 14th, 1967 is when you must have this event. And he's involved with the committees, and if you can call it that set this event up. It draws tens of thousands of people. He's there. He's there, but he's not on stage. Now, probably the most distinctive contribution that you could say other than the human being and other than just the fact that he was the grandson of Chester Arthur, is in 1962, where he publishes a book, The Circle of Sex, and it attempts to rethink human sexuality. And he wants to get beyond just, very simple descriptions of just, men like women, women like men, and even men liking men and men liking women, to get beyond that. And you're seeing concepts that have been introduced in other books, but are talking about it. And today you might say like polyamory or things like this. Bisexuality. He doesn't have all the money. The father and some of the family spent some of that money that they had inherited. And so he doesn't have the same amount of money. He's struggling financially at times. But he was a connector, and he was well networked, and he helped shape conversations that would define mid-20th century counterculture. So the story of the two Arthur, the son and the grandson, is not maybe what other politicians have, what their sons or daughters have, but you also have to remember that this is what Arthur wanted. So President Arthur told his son, don't get involved in politics, and that instruction was followed. I'm not sure there was any danger of Alan getting into politics. And so when you compare the Arthur children to Garfield, you see less of a desire to get involved in that world of politics and more of a desire to influence the culture in different ways.
Every Sunday, we cover the week's tech news on This Week in Tech. Hi, this is Leo Laporte from the Twit Podcast Network, inviting you to join me this week for Harper Reed and Alex Wilhelm. We'll talk about the new Chinese AI models. Here they come. But what is China's end game, and how will the U.S. government respond? We'll also talk about the teleprompter operator who made $100,000 betting on Trump speeches. That's this week on This Week in Tech. You'll find it at twit.tv and wherever you get your podcasts.